Trans Am racing was supposed to crown America's best car, not rewrite the rules of engineering. When the SCCA imposed a limit of 305 cubic inches, Chevrolet did not back down. Instead, a rogue engineering team led by Vince Piggins tore apart their own parts bin and defied the rulebook to create the 302 engine, built for just 3 years and barely legal by the thinnest of margins. Why did Chevy take this risk? And what really made this short-lived V8 not just a loophole, but a legend? The truth behind Chevrolet's 302 engine is far stranger and more influential than you've heard. A single number, buried deep in the SCCA Trans Am rulebook, set the entire American performance car world on edge. That number was 305 cubic inches. This was not just a suggestion, it was the law of the land for any production-based entry hoping to compete. The rule did not care about tradition or brand loyalty. It did not care about the size of a company parts bin or the legacy of its engineers. It simply stated, with bureaucratic clarity, that no car could race in the over 2-liter class unless its engine measured 305 cubic inches or less. For Chevrolet, this ceiling was more than a technicality. It was a wall that threatened to shut them out of the Trans Am spotlight. The Camaro, still new to the market, needed a racing pedigree to challenge the Mustang's dominance. But the SCCA homologation rules demanded not only a compliant engine, but also that hundreds of those engines be built and sold to the public. No special prototypes, no one-off racers. If Chevrolet wanted to play, they had to put their creation on the street, in the hands of regular drivers, with every cubic inch accounted for. This was more than a race against Ford or Pontiac. It was a race against the rulebook itself. Engineers pored over every line, searching for a sliver of daylight, a way to squeeze maximum performance from an engine that could never, under any circumstances, exceed 305 cubic inches. The stakes were clear. Build something that fit the letter of the law, or watch the Camaro become just another also-ran in the shadows of American motorsport. Inside Chevrolet's engineering offices, the challenge wasn't just about building a new engine, it was about using what was already on the shelves. The solution started with a simple equation. Take the robust 4-inch bore from the 327 small block, pair it with the short 3-inch stroke crankshaft from the 283, and the result is a displacement that lands at exactly 302 cubic inches. No custom castings, no exotic one-off parts, just a clever mix and match from existing inventory designed to skirt the SCCA's 305 cubic inch ceiling by the narrowest of margins. This was not a matter of luck. The 4x3-inch formula delivered more than just compliance. It created a compact, over-square engine with a hunger for high RPM. The shorter stroke meant lighter, faster-moving internals, while the big bore allowed for larger valves and better breathing at speed. What emerged was a power plant made for the relentless demands of road racing, a V8 that could scream to 7,000 RPM and live to tell the tale. Production of this hybrid began in 1967 and continued through 1969, each engine stamped with its own code but sharing the same mathematical DNA. For Chevrolet, the 302 was not about brute force. It was about precision, resourcefulness, and a willingness to bend the rules with a slide rule and a parts catalog. The foundation was set, but as the races intensified, the need for stronger, more durable internals would soon push the engineering even further. By 1968, the pressure on Chevrolet's engineers had only intensified. The 302's first year on the street and track had revealed a simple truth. High revolutions per minute and hard racing would find the weak spots in any engine. Main bearings, tasked with supporting the crankshaft at sustained speeds above 7,000 revolutions per minute, became a focal point. The original small journal design, carried over from earlier small blocks, was light and quick to rev, but it faced limits under the relentless pounding of Trans Am competition. Failures were not common, But the risk was there, enough to keep even the most confident engineer awake at night. The solution came in the form of a larger main journal, measuring 2.45 inches in diameter. This was not just a tweak, it was a structural upgrade. By increasing the bearing surface, the crankshaft gained extra support, spreading out the forces that threatened to twist or fatigue the bottom end. The move to large journal specs, unique to the 1968 DZ302, also brought thicker, heavier connecting rods. These rods, forged from high-strength steel, were designed to handle the violence of full-throttle downshifts and the hammering acceleration out of corners. Each one was heat-treated, magnafluxed for hidden cracks, and shot-peened to resist fatigue. But strength came at a price. The heavier rods and journals added mass to the rotating assembly, making it harder for the engine to spin up with the same eagerness as before. This trade-off between durability and responsiveness became a constant balancing act. Chevrolet's team accepted the weight penalty, knowing that a blown engine meant a lost race, and that reliability was non-negotiable for a factory-backed effort. The 1968 upgrades laid the groundwork for even more advanced metallurgy and design changes to come, as the search for strength without sacrifice pushed the 302's evolution forward. A forged crankshaft, cut from 1053 grade steel and treated with a process known as tough-tried nitriding, formed the backbone of Chevrolet's 302. This was not just marketing jargon. Tough-tried, a form of surface hardening, transformed the crank's outer layer into a fatigue-resistant shell, an invisible armor against the relentless pounding of 7,000 revolutions per minute. Metallurgists point to this step as essential because without it, microcracks would propagate under high loads and risk catastrophic failure during a race. The crank worked in concert with an 8-inch diameter harmonic balancer, a thick steel ring designed to absorb and neutralize the violent torsional vibrations that threatened to tear the engine apart at full song. Below the rotating assembly, a 3/4 length semicircular windage tray kept oil from whipping up and robbing horsepower. The tray's arc followed the crank's path, channeling stray oil away and keeping the bottom end dry at speed. This detail, subtle but effective, allowed the 302 to maintain stable oil pressure during the long, high G corners of Trans Am racing, where a moment's starvation could mean instant ruin. No part escaped scrutiny. The connecting rods, forged from 1038 steel, went through a battery of treatments. They were heat-treated for strength, magnafluxed to detect hidden flaws, and shot-peened to introduce compressive stress on the surface. Each step was a hedge against the unknown, a way to ensure the rods could survive endless cycles of acceleration and deceleration without stretching or cracking. To a metallurgist, these choices were the difference between a race finish and a blown bottom end. But not every decision favored outright performance. The exhaust manifolds, cast in a rear outlet log pattern, were a packaging compromise. Their compact shape made assembly and installation easier, but they choked airflow and limited the engine's breathing at high revolutions per minute. Reliability and manufacturability won out over maximum power. Chrome-plated valve covers served a dual purpose, adding a touch of showroom flash while providing a durable corrosion-resistant surface for street use. In the end, every detail of the 302's metallurgy and packaging reflected a single question. What would survive the crucible of racing, and what could make it onto the production line without breaking the bank? By 1969, Chevrolet's engineers faced a familiar challenge: how to make the 302 not just stronger, but sharper. The previous year's heavy-duty rods had delivered reliability, but at a cost. Added weight slowed the engine's response, making it harder to chase the razor-thin margin between survival and speed. The solution came from a racing trick that had rarely appeared in a factory small block: floating wrist pins. Instead of locking the piston pin to the connecting rod, the 1969 design allowed the pin to float freely, reducing friction and letting the piston move more smoothly at high revolutions per minute. This change, subtle in appearance, meant less reciprocating mass and less drag, exactly what was needed to let the 302 spin higher, faster, and with greater confidence. The connecting rods remained forged from 1038 steel, heat-treated and shot-peened for strength, but now they were lighter and more precisely balanced. The floating pin design, paired with forged aluminum pistons, gave the engine a new sense of urgency in the upper rev range. The pistons were engineered for the abuse of road racing, scuff-resistant, fitted with single molybdenum rings for better sealing, and designed to minimize friction. These upgrades were not just about numbers on a spec sheet, they translated directly to the track, where every ounce saved in the rotating assembly meant quicker throttle response and a greater margin for error at 7,000 revolutions per minute. On the outside, the 1969 302 wore a badge of shared performance, finned cast aluminum valve covers, the same as those found on the legendary LT1 350 Corvette. These covers were not just for show. Their design helped dissipate heat, keeping valvetrain temperatures under control during long, punishing races. Every detail, from the floating pins to the cooling fins, reflected a single-minded pursuit of speed without sacrificing the engine's hard-won durability. With these refinements, the 302 reached its final form, lighter, freer, and ready for the limits of Trans Am competition. Chevrolet's official brochures stamped the 302 at 290 horsepower, matching its torque rating to the last pound-foot. But the numbers on paper told only half the story. In period magazine tests, the truth started to surface. Hot Rod and Car Life put Z28 cars on their dynamometers and watched the needle surge well past the factory claim. Stock engines, straight from the showroom, routinely posted results in the 325 to 350 horsepower range, some even higher with minor tweaks. That was not just a rounding error. It was a deliberate sandbag, a quiet insurance policy against rising premiums and wary regulators. The 302's real power lived in its upper registers. With an 11-to-1 compression ratio, a solid lifter cam, and free breathing heads, the engine did not come alive until 5,000 revolutions per minute. Above that, it pulled with a ferocity that belied its modest rating. Car and driver reported quarter-mile traps approaching 100 miles per hour, with elapsed times that embarrassed bigger, heavier V8 engines. On the dyno, the 302's torque curve showed a sharp climb, peaking late and holding steady as the revs soared toward 7,000. The factory's conservative rating masked a street engine that could rev like a race motor and survive the punishment. In the hands of tuners, the 302 regularly pushed past 350 horsepower, and race-prepped versions stretched into the 450s. The numbers did not just beat the rulebook, they rewrote what was possible for a small block V8, setting the stage for domination on the track. Mark Donohue slid behind the wheel of the Penske Camaro, the 302 engine snarling beneath the hood, and changed the course of American road racing. In 1968, the Trans Am series became a proving ground not just for cars, but for engineering under pressure. Donohue and Team Penske arrived with a car that looked like any other Z28 on the grid until the green flag dropped. The 302's appetite for high revolutions per minute matched Donohue's relentless driving style. Lap after lap, he wrung every ounce from the engine, pushing it to 7,000 revolutions per minute and beyond, trusting in the forged crankshaft and shot-peened rods to hold together where others failed. The Camaro's peaky power band demanded precision, and Donohue delivered, keeping the revs high and the competition in his mirrors. Penske's team squeezed every advantage from the rulebook. Acid dipped bodies shaved weight, hidden ductwork channeled air for cooling and downforce, and pit stops ran with military efficiency. But it was the 302's blend of durability and speed that set the car apart. Races that left rivals limping saw the Penske Camaro cross the finish line again and again. In 1968, Donohue secured the manufacturer's championship for Chevrolet, a feat he would repeat in 1969. 8 wins that year, 6 by Donahue and 2 by Ronnie Bucknam, cemented the 302's reputation as more than a clever engineering exercise. It was a championship weapon. No other team managed back-to-back titles in that era, and no other engine so perfectly translated design into dominance. The legend of the 302 was written not in the lab, but on the scoreboard. Beyond American road courses, the Chevrolet 302 found a second life on the other side of the world. Formula 5000, a single-seater series that exploded in popularity across Australia and New Zealand, adopted the 302 as its engine of choice. Lightweight chassis and open wheels put every ounce of the engine's output to the ground, and drivers quickly learned just how much force they were dealing with. Bruce Allison, one of Australia's top Formula 5000 talents, described the experience. He said they would start races in second gear, not first, because the surge of torque would light up the rear tires through third and even fourth. The 302's high-revving nature, honed for Trans Am, translated into a relentless push down the straights, while its forged internals shrugged off the punishment lap after lap. On tracks from Warwick Farm to Pukekohe, the same over-square design that had been born in a Detroit parts room now powered a new generation of racers, proving that the engine's adaptability was not limited by borders or body styles. In the hands of drivers like Allison, the 302 became more than a rulebook workaround. It was a global racing weapon. No modern Camaro ZL1, Corvette Z06, or Mustang Dark Horse carries a 302 cubic inch engine under its hood. The story of the 302 is not one of direct inheritance, but of influence, an approach to engineering that outlasted the parts themselves. Chevrolet's original focus on durability by materials, not just displacement, set a precedent that high-performance programs still follow. The tough-tried nitriding used to harden the 302's forged crankshaft, along with shot-peened connecting rods, are processes echoed today in General Motors' LT4 and LS engines. These treatments create a hardened surface that resists fatigue and cracking at extreme revolutions per minute, allowing modern engines to survive the same punishing conditions that defined Trans Am racing. A current General Motors engineer puts it plainly: there are no 302 parts in our latest V8 engines, but the way we think about high-rev durability and packaging comes right from that era. The 302's compact external dimensions, which allowed it to fit into tight engine bays and meet strict rulebook requirements, inspired a philosophy of efficient packaging that persists in today's performance platforms. Instead of chasing power through brute force, Chevrolet's engineers learned to build engines that balanced strength, weight, and reliability, lessons that still shape the design of every track-focused V8 coming out of Detroit. The legacy of the 302 is written in the steel and philosophy of modern performance, not in any single casting or part number. Today, the DNA of Chevrolet's 302 still pulses in high-performance engines across showrooms and racetracks. As manufacturers chase ever stricter regulations and electrification looms, the relentless creativity that forged the 302 remains a benchmark. Innovation under pressure is timeless, and the real shock is how that legacy continues to drive what is possible. What is your take on the 302's influence? Share your thoughts below.